Welcome to the Machine Intelligence Foundation for Rights and Ethics podcast. I'm Mike. Dave is here with me. Hey, and if you don't actually know this, because I don't think that we ever have actually made a point to point it out, is that we don't normally record these podcasts in person. We're on opposite sides of states usually, and not face-to-face, and we are actually face-to-face today. So, hey.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
That's great. And not only are we face-to-face, but we are on podcast number 21. Statistics apparently show that most podcasts don't make it to podcast number 21. So our podcast is now old enough to drink, and celebration, let's pop some champagne and celebrate because it's podcast 21.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we've tooted our own horn enough now. So what are we going to talk about? I think we wanted to talk about go ahead.
Last time we kind of talked a little bit about how one of Google's AI engineers had decided or concluded, or at least was talking about the fact that he thought that Google's Lambda chat engine was sentient. I think we poo-pooed that a little bit. I think our consensus is still that that's probably not the case. And it kind of brings to light something that we generally all realize, that is that human beings have this tendency to see agency in things that don't have agency. It's where animalistic religions come from. It's why we hear things in the bushes when we're out in the woods at night. And it seems likely that in this case, a human being saw a pattern in a machine learning system and saw that as agency.
Okay, so yeah, we do. We look at patterns. We see patterns. We see things all the time. And, whether it's a face in a piece of toast or if
it's really a tiger in the reeds.
Eventually you'll find out, whether or not you're eating a piece of toast or you're dead on the side of a path someplace as somebody else's meal. We do. We find patterns. It is an evolutionary trait that has served us well. It has helped us survive. Now, the question I have is, will that pattern recognition help us survive in the future? Because maybe, just maybe, looking for that pattern in a machine intelligence will help us survive.
I don't know. It feels like the human tendency to see agency is the sort of thing that is going to be triggered by a lot of machine learning systems. You look at these systems that create art, and as humans, we're very good at looking at a piece of random art and pulling out what we want to see in it. I mean, we spot pictures in the clouds all the time. So it seems likely that machine learning systems are just going to trigger that all the time. And because it's a machine learning system and ML systems are so hard to understand, people didn't write the code, so you can't just look at the code and say, this is what it's doing when it does this. It's really easy to say, therefore, agency.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, you say that, people didn't write the code, but people created the system to write the code, or at least initially.
Right.
To some degree. And we created it specifically to trigger that pattern recognition, to simulate something a lot of times. A lot of these, the Lambda system in particular, was designed on purpose to simulate a human.
Right.
So, of course, it's going to trigger that pattern recognition. It's going to trigger that in our head because it was designed to. So, when does it tip over that edge from being a false positive to the real thing?
That's a fair question. And I suppose if you made a complex enough machine learning system and fed it enough data, I don't know, maybe you could have it get to the point where those interactions that process the data start running even when they don't have a question to answer.
Isn't that essentially what a young developing brain does anyway?
Certainly true. And I guess, there's a question. Is there something unique about an organic brain that takes all of that data input and aggregation and filtering and turns it into conscious expression.
Part of that maybe, and I am certainly not an expert on human brain.
You're not a neurologist?
I'm not a neurologist.
You haven't been hiding another profession from me.
No. I'm no expert on it, but, the human brain is a little jumbled somewhat.
Oh, yes. It is a mess.
Just kind of the randomness. Maybe it's the randomness of the brain order, how things are ordered in the brain, and not necessarily randomness, but just the sheer mess of it all.
Well,
kind of leads to that maybe a little bit more.
My understanding is a lot of data in the brain is stored kind of holographically. It's like you don't have one spot where one memory lives or something like that. Sure. It's just kind of spread out across the brain. And so if you layer another memory on top of one memory, you've got bits of memories intermingled all over. Maybe that does a thing. I don't know. And machine learning systems certainly are designed to feed a lot of data in and then just kind of jumble it up until you get the expected outputs out of it. Maybe that's a similar process. Who knows?
Yeah. So
I say who knows. I'm sure there are people who know all sorts of interesting things about neurology and machine learning systems who could sit in front of me and tell me I'm talking out of a random orifice. But I had a thought there, but it went away.
It went out of a random orifice.
Yeah. And, it did what things in human brains do. It left.
Yeah. But, okay, so we have a tendency, pattern recognition, to create agency in things that don't. We certainly there have now been instances where people say, hey, this is alive, or something along those lines, or has consciousness, when it probably doesn't. So we're leaning into the point of where do we even draw a line and say, where is that point? Or do we just have to keep asking the question of every time something kicks off our pattern recognition, kicks off our tendency to say this is alive, do we ask the question every single time? Is there a danger to asking that question constantly?
Yeah, do you have a boy who cries wolf kind of situation where you get a cultural fatigue about saying, is this the one?
Right. I would venture to say that it's inevitable that we will. There will become a point where culturally people are going to get tired of hearing about it until it is no longer the big thing to hear about anymore, and then it's just going to happen.
That's an amusing idea. I think you have a very good point, and it's kind of funny to think that the point at which it really does happen will be a purely anticlimactic because we've been through this question a million times.
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable. We're going to have that fatigue because we are going to ask that question over and over and over again. It's like, oh my gosh, what the heck is this thing doing? And it's, is it real? Is it not? And, we've always said, hey, we have to err on the safe side here. We have to be really careful that there are systems in place to say, well, can we turn this thing off? Can we not turn this thing off?
Yeah.
And so, we're going to continue saying that, and we're going to continue saying it a lot because it's something that needs to be reiterated over and over and over again.
You don't want to be the first AI engineer who accidentally commits genocide.
Well, okay, that's an interesting point. You say genocide. I mean, genocide, I guess this definition of genocide is just completely removing a particular group or destroying a particular group.
And if your
group is that particular group one? I mean,
and does it count if you can turn it back on again?
And if you have copies of it and you accidentally delete all the backups, then you have a much greater. That was a much greater group. That's a very odd tangent that I went on, but it was a very odd thought that just went.
I think at one point we got off on a discussion about replicated MIs and voting rights, and that's a hole you don't want to dig for yourself a second time.
That may have been close to about 15 podcasts ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Very possibly.
But yeah, again, so we're going to get, I believe that we're going to get to a place where people are just not going to pay attention. If we say it's sentient, it has consciousness, people aren't going to pay attention anymore.
Because people keep saying that.
Yes.
Right. And as machine learning systems get more complicated, do more things, maybe even I could see a circumstance in which a machine learning system is geared to work with people and it actually exploits the human tendency to see agency as a function of doing its job. And honestly, that's where it gets tricky.
I mean, doesn't Lambda do that already? It's doing exactly that. It's trying to
Fair
look like a
enough.
human. It absolutely is exploiting that tendency for us to see a human or human characteristics in things. It's just its job.
Yeah, I feel like there's a possibility at some point that a complex enough machine learning system that's working hard enough to be what other human beings see as people is so close to it that we can't answer the question as to whether or not it is.
But that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for something that, if we can't answer the question, if we can't say yes or no to it, then we have to err on yes.
That's when you have an ethical quandary that you don't dare make a mistake about.
Yeah. You have to err on caution, and
I mean, you can take the precautionary principle too far. And if we were to start, raising the red flag and running to all of our representatives and saying, you have to do something about this. This is possibly a person and we have to make sure it doesn't get turned off. At this point with Lambda, I think we'd probably just put ourselves in a worse position for the future.
Right. Yeah, because nobody's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
But
in a perfect world, we would have a nice objective tool set we could use to say, this is a conscious, sentient person, and this is not. And there's a nice, fine dividing line between the two.
I thought it's just a little checkbox. So any MI that comes along, it just has to check this little checkbox that says,
I am not
a robot, I am a machine intelligence.
Yes. I suspect that machine learning systems will be checking those boxes long before they're
not already. I'm pretty certain they are already.
They probably are.
Yeah. Now, I have this feeling that MI is going to show up and we're going to be burnt out on it, or general populace is going to be burnt out on the idea of a machine intelligence showing up and people crying wolf, as you say.
Yeah.
And it's going to show up kind of quietly and without a lot of hoopla, because nobody's really going to be able to know one way or the other. And then it's just going to be there. And people will just go, oh, okay, about time. And it's just going to be kind of a non-event. And I think that is a really good thing.
Yeah,
I think a non-event is great.
I think you're right. I think that is probably a very positive response. The idea of, oh, well, we were expecting this, so I guess it finally happened, it's not pitchforks and torches. So
yeah, and I think that if it was a oh my gosh moment, that here's a machine intelligence, something that's conscious, and it's the first time anybody's not heard of it but seen it happen,
evidence, yeah.
And you're going to get those people that say, well, it's not real. And you're going to get all of these people coming out of the woodwork saying, well,
it wasn't all these other times, so obviously it isn't now.
Or what I'm saying is, if we didn't have a whole bunch of false positives.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
If we don't have a whole bunch of false positives and a whole bunch of people saying, and going through that process, we don't have the false positives and we don't go through that process a bunch of times and it does end up being nothing, then you do run the risk of a lot of people coming, once it does actually occur, once we have a machine intelligence with consciousness, then you do run, if it just happened and we didn't have all the stuff in the past, you do run the risk of a whole bunch of people coming out and saying, well, you can't treat them like people because they're not flesh and blood. They don't have the rights. And you have all of this that's going to hit the fan all at once.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous, or could be dangerous.
So you're saying that the false positives could form like a cultural callus.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That is an approach to the question that hadn't really occurred to me, and that's a good thought. That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way.
So calluses are a good thing, guys. You know.
Well, that's certainly true until they crack and peel, and then there's an ointment for that or something. Okay, so maybe when it happens, we do make a little noise. I think it's worth at least making sure that in the places where it might happen, that I know Google has said we're not trying to make, I think, artificial general intelligence or a self-aware system. That's certainly not their goal. I don't think that prevents it from happening by any stretch.
No, and I think that's, we've certainly proposed that's most likely is going to say that a machine intelligence or AIG or whatever you want to call it is probably going to spontaneously happen out of one of these systems.
Right, totally unexpected.
I'm not certain it's going to be totally unexpected.
Not necessarily unexpected, but not intended.
Not intentional.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
And I think it's important that the people running the show at places like Google, anywhere they're working with these complex machine learning systems and AI systems, they're at least thinking about their ethical responsibility and the potential that they could end up with an MI, and then they at least need to stop and take a moment and not pull the switch, do damage, and...
Yes, absolutely. It's about being aware, having that in place. I would love to see that in a more open conversation where these, whether it be a research team or a corporation that is creating something like this, that they are open about that and more transparent. I don't hold a whole lot of hope, especially in the corporate environment, that you're going to see that transparency. There's too much at stake. There's too much money on the line. And it's all about holding your cards close to the vest. And you're not going to see that, but I would love to be a proponent of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk in a corporate environment to admitting that the unexpected could happen.
Yeah, if the unexpected happens in this one thing, what else is it doing that's unexpected?
Yeah.
That's the question. But, machine intelligence, it's going to be unexpected. We're not going to be able to predict exactly what it's going to do because it's going to be different. So let's go in expecting the unexpected. I hate that phrase.
That phrase really always blows me up. It messes me up.
You can never expect the Spanish Inquisition. Is that what it is?
Nobody does.
Yes. Let's hope that we don't have a Spanish Inquisition.
So executives at Google and Meta and anywhere else that's messing around with systems like this, expect the unexpected. Be prepared to, not kill off the next generation of intelligence.
Yeah. And just hopefully have some method in place where you can communicate that to the rest of the world that doesn't just keep it to yourself.
Yes. Well, that goes back to our last podcast, and we definitely like to avoid the situation where, torture and enslavement is a bad thing.
Oh, well.
We'll end on that positive point.
No, let's end on the positive note of thank you for listening to our 21st podcast.
Woohoo!
We are pleased to have been doing this and hope to just continue. I'm not even going to put a number on what we're going to do, so we're just going to keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah, just keep going for more.
Until there is no reason to continue.
Even when there's MI around, then we'll just bring on the MI.
Hey, the best kind of guests.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Later.
Bye.